Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Redneckologist show. I'm Spur.
And I'm Coot.
And this is a brand new segment we have called Redneck Rants.
You know, a lot of things we come up short on, but when it comes to fishing and hunting, we don't ever under-exaggerate. We always over-exaggerate.
Right. Now, one of my peeves, though, is when somebody, because of circumstances and they happen to get super, super lucky, they were walking from their truck to their stand or blind and happened to kill a deer because it was standing in a turn row or roadway or whatever on their way, or trail or whatever, on their way to their stand, and they raise up the gun and shoot it. The third time they retell it, they walked that deer up. They were deliberately out there like survivalistic, primitive hunting, and they worked that deer up out of there, and they wasn't even using the stand or that corn pile they shot it off of.
Well, you know me, Spur, I always tell it like it is. When you're deer hunting, it's a lot of slipping down there and getting on your stand, getting all ready and waiting and waiting and waiting. And I always say, you know, a lot of times, or most of the times, it takes 2 or 3 hours to hunt, but only, 10 seconds to kill a deer.
That's right. Another thing I don't like is when somebody shoots a deer off of their corn pile or bran pile or whatever they're using, and they know for a fact that bait is 120 yards away. But again, the third time they tell it, that sucker's 250 yards down there when they shot it. Open sight, no scope.
And it's funny how they gain weight, or how I killed the biggest deer I ever killed in my life was a 14-point buck, okay? And I was proud of him. He was a beautiful, beautiful rack. And non-typical, but I still, 14 points. Now, that's a deer. But I dressed the deer, left his neck all intact, to be mounted and everything. Didn't split the hide up, like you're not supposed to do. And I carried that head. I killed that deer on Saturday, and I think it was Monday or Tuesday before I could get to the newspaper in the hometown where we lived.
Right.
And I carried that head over there. And I told the man, I said, man, I got me a nice deer out here, and I noticed you got a lot of deer in your newspaper where people have killed a deer. And he says, okay, let me bring my camera, and I'll come out there and get a picture, and then we'll get you information. So he comes out, and I sit down on my tailgate of my truck, and of course all I've got's a head, and I'm holding those horns, and, just as proud as I can be, because I won a rifle on him.
Right.
Walmart big buck contest. But anyway, he takes the picture, and we go back in, and he gets my name and address and all that kind of stuff, and he looks around at me, and he said, well, how much did the deer weigh? And I said, I don't know, I didn't weigh him. And he says, well, what do you think he weighed? Well, I thought about maybe trying to load the deer on my three-wheeler and get it up to the camp, and I grabbed him by all 4 legs, and I could just barely clear his body off the ground. And I told the man, I said, well, I kind of estimated he probably weighed 175 pounds. And he said, okay. And he wrote that down, and that's what came out in the newspaper. And I said, aha, now I know how these people killing these 250 and 60 and 280 pound deer.
They overestimate how much they can deadlift, is what it is. Those deer aren't that big. Now, I got a story, though.
They're that big in some areas, but...
And what he's talking about, we're not killing muleys, we're killing whitetail.
Whitetail.
Right. So, here's my story. I catch a bass that's 2 foot long, 24 inches.
24 inches, I've seen him.
24 inches. We didn't weigh him right away because I was, the boat was small and I was afraid of losing him. I didn't know where the scales were offhand, so I just got him in the water, right in the live well. And which is a nice chest, but that's another story. But anyway, we got him in the water, and he bellied up before we got done fishing. I caught this fish right away as soon as we got there. So he bellied up before we finished fishing. and they lose a little weight when you weigh them, after they're dead. And he weighed 8 pounds. And
I don't know what the rate is on that, but they do. They tell me they lose a tremendous amount of weight, even in the live well, if they're still alive.
Right, but anyway, so long story short, I figured he probably weighed 8.5. So anyway, I weigh this bass, and he weighs 8 pounds dead. So I figured I'm going light, I'm going easy. I say 8.5. I called him an 8.5 pound bass, which is a big freaking bass. I mean, I'm not ashamed.
He was a good one.
He was a nice bass.
Or she was.
Or she was. Yeah, it was a she. And you can look at the bass, and the gut's not huge. I mean, it wasn't big hanging down. But then somebody else catches one. It's like 18, 19 inches long, and they come up talking about they caught a 10, 11 pound bass. How in the heck is your bass without, and you can look at it, there's no big, huge gut on it. It's not a big old bass. How did yours outweigh mine by almost 4 pounds?
It's called over-exaggeration.
Right. That's what we're talking about. So be careful, because most of the times when you lie about stuff like that or you over-exaggerate, the bottom line is when you catch a fish or you shoot a deer at distance or whatever and you start over-exaggerating, guess what we're going to do? We're going to go, mm-hmm.
We're going to call you on it.
No, not necessarily. See, that's my point is we're not going to call you on it. We're going to sit there and go, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then we're going to turn around and talk about you behind your back because you just lied your butt off, right? So be careful and be honest, and let's just all have a good time. The rant is done, and this is Spur.
And I'm Coot.
And don't forget to subscribe.